And hello, everybody. Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren. Jaime. Thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what's the show all about? Well, we bring you a forum discussing and providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests provide multiple perspectives as well as insights, helping us to better understand and address the challenges. So we invite you to stay connected with us. The Social Justice Forums starts now. And welcome back. Since the tragic events of 9/11, the Muslim community has often found itself at the center of public scrutiny, grappling with misconceptions as well as stereotypes, overshadowing the true essence of its identity and contributions to society. However, amidst the challenges, organizations like the Muslim Community Network have emerged, dedicating to reshaping perceptions and fostering a more inclusive society. And joining me now is the Executive Director of the Muslim Community Network. We've got Husein Yatabarry, and we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate having you. So listen, when we talk about this, it's kind of, the word I want to say is it's kind of frustrating in some areas, right? Because I feel like at a certain juncture, we should be better than this.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, obviously, the Muslim community is a large community. I mean, New York City alone, it's a population of 1 million now, out of, like, so 10% of the city population. But the media narratives and the spin that's been out around the Muslim community since 9/11, or even before that, when you had movies with like Jean-Claude Van Damme or Steven Seagal, and they was always fighting the brown or black and brown Muslim from across the waters. So that kind of elevated during 9/11, and then the past president, Muslim ban, then you have now October 7th happen. So in each era, the animus around Muslims just continues to intensify.
Right. For yourself, talk to me about looking at 9/11. You looked at 9/11, we already knew there were challenges, you said, that were pre-existing. But then afterwards, the stereotyping, the bias, the hate, and we look at where we are today, how far have we traveled?
We thought that we were making some strides. So after 9/11, it was a very difficult time for the Muslim community. You have to really understand, even my name being Husein, and in 2003, America goes to war against Iraq, against Saddam Hussein. So I'm the butt of jokes at school. Like, it just makes you feel demeaning. And then you have people just talking down upon your religion because people assume you to be violent, assume for you to be standing for terroristic ideals, when that's not the fact. When you actually come from a faith of peace that may have been co-opted by certain actors, but overall, there's almost 2 billion Muslims across the planet. 99.99% of them do not want violence, want to live in peace, want prosperity for their families. But that hasn't been the case. I feel like this nation and this city made a lot of strides since that early 9/11 time period. But then we've had certain time points, I would say in 2016 and now, and since 2023 and October 7th, we've kind of taken 3 steps back.
Right. Well, that last guy didn't make life any easier.
Not at all, not at all. Not for the Muslim community, not for immigrant communities in general.
So when we talk about this, we look at, there's this extremism that we know that exists. And we know, we talk about, bin Laden, we talk about all the stuff, Saddam Hussein, we could go all there. Those are really extremists. But then on the other side, you got the average, hardworking, loving Muslim, and the two become conflated.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is conflating political ideology with religion. Overwhelmingly, most Muslims are practicing a peaceful religion of Islam. Right now, we're in the month of Ramadan, where we're fasting for 29 to 30 days. But when you talk about political ideology, you talk about land and boundaries and who governs what domain. That's when you get into the problem of this fascism in some places, and also terrorist ideals, where it's really political ideology, and it's like people having these ideas and they feel like other ideas by the West or other actors may be imposed upon them. So people really need to separate that. It's not Islam that's driving these people. It's their own political ideology and whatever malintent that they have. So let's separate that from the religion, because in every religion we have bad actors.
Right.
So let's not kind of conflate those things.
So when we talk about education and awareness,
Yes.
that's where you come in, right?
Yes.
We got to educate the community.
Of
We have to
course.
also educate the, sometimes even our very own community.
Yeah.
How's that working?
So it's sad that we've had an increase in engagement from schools and external partners over the past 6 months. But at Muslim Community Network, we do a lot of diversity education work with school communities, with corporations. We've been at high schools. We actually have a high school event next week in Brooklyn where we go into the Muslim American experience. Who are Muslims? The true and accurate depiction of Islam, just to kind of shed light, because you have peers, you have coworkers, you have family members, you have neighbors that happen to be Muslim, and people have lived with these people for years, and that narrative that's being painted of being terroristic or being violent, you know that not to be the case. You live amongst them, but understanding more about them will help you dispel some of these myths and some of these rumors and some of these flat out lies about Muslims.
One thing that doesn't go away is the hate crimes. They continue. And unfortunately, they're painful.
Yeah.
And every time you see one, talk to me about, first of all, your reaction when you see here, particularly in the Muslim community, another hate crime.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts a lot. When you think about the Muslim community, you talk about a very strong Black and African community, but you also talk about a largely immigrant community when you talk about New York City. Xenophobia is also then mixed with Islamophobia, and it's like a recipe for disaster, where you even have people that are not Muslims, like Sikhs, who wear turbans, get mistaken for Muslims when there's always some anti-Muslim sentiment in the city or across the world. The huge issue with that is people don't really have the education or awareness as to who Muslims are, so whenever something happens 3,000 miles away, it just blankly gets kind of glazed over all Muslims in our city, and it's really sad and it's really disheartening, because you always think we're in America, the country of ideals, of liberty, of like understanding and freedoms, but then you still have a group of people, I'm talking about 1 million New Yorkers, who do feel scared, who do have fear. Whenever something happens that's on the global news, as a Muslim, you know it may affect you here, because someone may co-opt that and say, hey, it's time to get these Muslims out of my neighborhood, or get these Muslims out of our city or out of our country. And you hear it a lot in the South. You hear less of it in New York, but it's still there in some pockets.
Right. I want to talk about when we are out there on the street, right? And you're walking the street and you're looking around and you're saying, okay, I can see better in terms of population. More and more people are here.
Yeah.
It's a more diverse neighborhood.
Yeah.
But yet, and still, while it's a more diverse neighborhood, there's still this need for diversity education, right? That you would think with more people, things would sometimes be better. But with my boots on the ground and the people that I've talked to, they say, listen, when it comes to issues of, diversity education, when it comes to issues of awareness of these critical areas of, of race and religion, people are still stuck in the sand. How do you see it?
I think you're right, and I think it really starts from educations in schools. So Muslim Community Network, we're actually working with Councilwoman Shahana Hanif to introduce a resolution, 0095, which is going to introduce religious diversity curriculums into New York City public schools. It calls on the New York City public school system to work with faith-based organizations, not just Muslims, but Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Sikh. It doesn't matter if your kids are in schools. I think everyone should get a little taste and a little glimpse into how people practice these religions within the city. What are some of the markers? What are some of the symbols? How is some ways that you can talk to your neighbors, like when it's their celebratory moments? And it also provides religious professional development for teachers, for staff, so that they can actually learn more about their students and families as well. I think with this comprehensive look into religious diversity education in schools, you'll start from the youngest, but you really kind of nurture an inclusive society where people really have an understanding from K through 12 of, oh, that's my friend Husein. He celebrates Ramadan. I'm gonna say Ramadan Mubarak when it's my friend's birthday. When it's my friend's birthday. When it's my friend's holiday of Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, I know why they're doing it. I know some of the phrases to say to them when it's their time of year, but it really builds that inclusivity from young, and I think that's where we really need to start. Sometimes trying to change and adjust adults is very difficult work. A lot of adults are ingrained in certain ideologies, but if we can kind of start that process in the schools, that's where we really got to hit home.
Yeah, these city streets can be mean.
Yeah.
What's your take on city streets today in terms of the climate?
So city streets, when you look at stats, you see like overall, obviously there is crime reduction in a lot of different categories, but obviously the sentiment, people don't feel safe.
Right.
People don't feel safe for a number of reasons, and a lot of it has been attributed to the migrant crisis. Let's just keep it 1,000. People see black and brown migrants coming into the city, and there's been some very notable cases of migrant violence towards citizens of New York.
Right.
But overwhelmingly, when you look at crime, majority of crime are conducted by citizens of New York that have been here for long periods of time. So it's just like a real understanding of just the sentiment that people are feeling, because there's just so much media and so much social media that shows negativity and that shows the overwhelming violence that you don't really see the positives that's being contributed by Muslim communities, immigrant communities, black and brown communities. That's not highlighted as much. Shows like this really kind of showcase the work that's being done in the social justice field by black and brown people, but oftentimes it's a lot of those negative depictions because that's what's good for the evening news.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked you about what's your take on the climate is because there is this general consensus that the media narrative puts out, which is basically, we'll use it as a thermometer, for example.
Yes.
They set a thermometer as to what they see.
Of course.
But the reality is we see something totally different
Yeah.
than what the thermometer actually reads,
Yeah.
And I was trying to get to your perspective because I think so many times the thermometer, when it comes to the issues of the Muslim community, is already set.
Yes.
Right? And the reality is I'm seeing something totally different.
Yeah.
So when you say about seeing something totally different, for yourself, what is it that you want people to know in this season who have been paying attention to the thermometer and reading it as such, but you got a different reading?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, I go back to it, 1 million Muslims in New York City. You have 100,000 Muslim students in New York City public school systems. You're talking about 10% of the health force field are all Muslims. You're talking about 400 plus mosques in the city as of 2024. So you're talking about overwhelmingly Muslims have been in the city contributing, really giving all they can in a positive manner back to the city, because we see everyone as neighbors, as our allies, as our friends, our brothers and our sisters. But obviously in this month of Ramadan, for Muslims is really, really hard. It's been really hard to practice, especially when you look at media. You see things that are happening across the seas in Palestine. You see just the impact and brutality that Muslims are facing across the world, whether it's Sudan, it's Palestine, and other places. You have Muslims in Congo that are really affected by a lot of violence. And it's really, really sad that we want the powers that be to call for ceasefire in a lot of these conflicts. We want the powers that be to really kind of speak up for Muslims and speak up for us and say, hey, Muslims contribute so much to us. We need to make sure that we're contributing and giving back to them in this city, in this country, but across the world. But I don't really get a lot of that from political powers.
Let's be clear, you are calling for a ceasefire.
Yes, I'm calling for a ceasefire wholeheartedly. Not a humanitarian pause, but a ceasefire. You have 2 million people displaced, 30,000 people killed. In the Palestinian side, you have 1,400 Israelis killed. It's just way too much violence. It has to end. It has to end sometime so that we could talk about some long-term solutions. But there's people that's in the rubble of Gaza that this Ramadan, they don't have food to break their fast with. You have a family that's sharing one loaf of bread together to break fast. That's not the way we should operate in this world. Not when we call ourselves the defenders of freedom and democracy. It doesn't look like that to me right now.
How do people get a better understanding of the Islam-Muslim experience?
I think subtle ways you can start is by talking to Muslims that you know, just around you, in your building, on your street, in your schools, in your workplace. I guarantee you there's a Muslim that lives somewhere near you. Like talking to them and just kind of getting their perspective. Because also we're also not a monolith. You know, I'm a Gambian Muslim. There's Arab Muslims. There are Latino Muslims. That's the fastest growing population of Muslims. There's South Asians. So we all have our cultures that's intertwined with our religion. And it's like, we all have very different, unique outlooks on what Islam is. We all believe in Allah. We all pray to Allah. But our culture is really infused. Like you come to the West African culture, you come to our parties, we're dancing, we're having fun. You may go to a different culture's version of Islam. Maybe it's like a little bit more serious, less music. Then you might go all out. You go, man, I've been around some Albanians and they party hard.
Right.
And it's just like, but that's the beauty of it. It's really a mosaic.
Right. As people get to learn more about the Muslim community, one of the things I think is, is the most important is just the education piece per se, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that education piece. And so, history. Let's go through American history.
Yes, of course.
Muslim contributions to American history. What can you tell us?
It starts from day one. Like the first enslaved people on this land, the first black people on this land were Muslim. Muslims helped build this country. Kunta Kinte, the story of Kunta Kinte is very well known. Kunta Kinte comes from Gambia. Like the town of Jufre is a stomping ground for all of us when we go back to Gambia to see where his village is, where his family was from, his mother Binta, the hut she was in, and like really understanding that Muslims really helped build this country from the early beginnings of this country's inception. Always been around, even though a lot of Muslims were forced out of Islam into Christianity, but the history is still there. Then you have the people like Malcolm X, who really fought for justice for all black Americans, not just Muslim black Americans, but all black Americans are Muslim. You have notable Muslims throughout the history of this country who have added to the activism, who have added to medicine, who have added to education. And throughout the history of the world, you're talking about math, algebra, algorithms. You're talking about some of the first schools in Cairo. You're talking about Muslims have had just numerous contributions to the world as a whole. And I think when we look at and kind of just put the spotlight on the 0.001% of Islam that may be violent or that may be attributed to negativity, I think then you miss the whole 99.99% that's really having a meaningful impact on this globe.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, I got to ask a question. How can non-Muslims help to embrace Ramadan?
Man, a good question. I think the first thing is not to ask, you can't even drink water?
Yeah.
I think that's a question I've gotten my whole life. I'm like, nah, I can't even drink water. I can't chew gum either. Just really understanding that your Muslim neighbors, they can't eat from sunrise to sunset, but it's really a month of really understanding that we all have blessings. The fact that I have the ability to break fast when it comes to turning 7 o'clock, that's a blessing. Like, I have food in my fridge. It's a month about really understanding and reflecting. There are people across the world that fasting, that's their norm.
Right.
They don't eat from sunrise to sunset because they're not doing this as a religious practice.
Spirits, right.
No, it's not spiritual. It's like, I legitimately cannot eat.
Right.
I need aid. I need food. So in the month of Ramadan, you can go to mosque and contribute with charity. All mosques are giving out iftar meals. Muslim Community Network ourselves, we are giving out iftar meals today at 97th Street Mosque, and we have some food distributions and food pantries across different areas of the city. And then also, like, we have Eid celebrations in April for the Muslim community. We're having one specifically in the Bronx at CES 55 with Principal Torres. But I think just really understanding and touching base with your Muslim neighbor and saying, where's your mosque? Do you guys need anything? Do you need cases of water? Do you need food during this Ramadan season so you could break iftar? How can we be of help? How can we make sure maybe we're playing our music too loud while you're fasting and that's something that you don't really listen to during Ramadan? Maybe we could lower our volume until after sunset, just as an accommodation, knowing that we are really neighbors. I think that's the ways we can be more inclusive.
Husein Yatabarry, thank you so much for being
Thank you
with
so
us,
much.
man. I appreciate you coming.
Of course.
Gotta
Take
come
care.
back again, my brother.
I would definitely will. Invite
All
me.
right. You invited, man. I already did that. Now we just gotta work out a date.
All right.
We know who to talk to. All right.
All right.
We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this.
I remember when the Bronx did not really have a media outlet properly representing the people of the Bronx.
BronxNet provides for the community by being a community where people can be empowered to share their voices.
We are in a really great place technologically. We've got all the resources that we need to be effective.
Whether it's through cameras, storytelling, editing, we have provided those services for 30 years.
BronxNet's mission is to be a voice for the community.
To educate, to inform, and to inspire.
And you can be a part of it. We've built studios for you.
And we are back. The Justice Committee stands as a beacon of empowerment and resistance, dedicated to combating police violence and systemic racism while uplifting the voices of marginalized communities. Their mission focuses on empowering low-income Latinx and other people of color to address these critical issues. And we've got now the Justice Committee's Director of Development Operations, Yul-San Liem, and Families Organizing Intern, Samy Feliz, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you. And so, as we talk, Yul-San, I'll ask you first of all, give me a little bit about the Justice Committee's, some of the mission and the initiatives you're working on.
Sure. Thanks again for having us. I'll start out by saying that this year is the Justice Committee's 40th anniversary, so we're very excited to be celebrating that. Since the 1980s, we have been organizing to end police violence and systemic racism in New York City. We use tactics like grassroots organizing, or tactics and strategies like grassroots organizing campaigns, community and public education, our Cop Watch program to train and activate New Yorkers to monitor and document police activities, and working with community to uplift and fight for a vision of community safety that is rooted in meeting people's needs and in transformative justice. The heart of our work has always been organizing and uplifting the leadership of families who've lost loved ones to police and survivors of police violence. So, for example, Samy, who's here today, and one example right now is the campaign that Samy is leading to ensure that one of the officers who killed his brother is fired. Another example of a campaign that we're working on is demanding that New York City divests from the NYPD and criminalization and instead invests in services and infrastructure that our communities need.
Yeah. Samy, let me bring you in, and again, thank you for taking the time to be with us and also sharing a little bit of your story. But you know, your road to activism came through a very painful way. Share with us a little bit about what got you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. The reason why I'm here and the reason I got thrusted into this role is because on October 17th of 2019, my brother was murdered by NYPD, and he was unjustly stopped in his car after being profiled. They beat him, they tasered him. After that, they pulled his limp body out of the vehicle after being shot, and while dragging his body out of the vehicle, they exposed his genitals to the public who was there, completely dehumanizing him and in that regard, and not caring for his life when they didn't render him any aid, and just left him out there to bleed out and die, being cuffed and exposed in the streets. And since that time, I've just been out fighting, but also understanding that I look the way that I look, and I am from the community that I am, and I'm also being continuously stopped, harassed, and prosecuted by officers as well.
So there is this How Many Stops Act campaign that's out there right now. You're active in it. For people who don't know about the How Many Stops Act campaign, can you give us a little insight?
Sure, me first or you first, Samy?
You can go ahead first, Yul-San.
Okay, sure. The How Many Stops Act is actually now the How Many Stops laws, but we, along with many, many other organizations, like a coalition of 100+ organizations, recently fought for and won the passage of 2 bills that together are called the How Many Stops Act. They are meant to ensure that the public and the city council have access to data to give us a full picture of the NYPD's most common police actions in our communities, so consent searches and street stops and investigative encounters. We have been waging this campaign since last year. At the end of the year, we won. The bills were passed, but then the mayor vetoed one of the 2 bills, and then we just, at the end of January, successfully overrode the mayor's veto. So the bills are now law. We are, of course, the NYPD has until the fall to implement them, and so we are now fighting to make sure that the NYPD fully implements both laws properly.
Yeah. And, talk to me a little bit, Samy, about yourself. And as we look at these laws coming into passage, it's got to give you some sense of relief to know that activism, legislation, and really hitting the streets to create awareness works.
Yeah, definitely super proud of the way that we were able to come together. I was just one of 28 families who signed to ensure that we were able to not only pass but override also the mayor's veto of the How Many Stops Act. And for us, it isn't too much about politics. It's more about the safeties of families out there and ensuring that we don't have a repeat case of what happened to my brother or what happened to other New Yorkers as well in the hands of police violence.
And so as we look around, we got a lot of things that are going on in our community in terms of challenges with the NYPD. I know that talking about the NYPD and mental health and really dealing with the mental health response, not seeing them be a part of that. Give us a little bit, Yul-San, about where we are there, because this is an alternative crisis, and people are struggling out there. And as they're struggling out there, I want to ask the question about this crisis and how can we better suit those who may be going through a mental health crisis without the intervention of the NYPD.
Right. Yeah, thanks for asking that, and you're absolutely right that our communities are struggling and suffering under multiple crises, and mental health is certainly one of them. To answer the question, I want to tell quickly the story of Mohammed Ba, who was killed in his home in 2012. He was struggling with mental health and physical health. His mother flew all the way from Guinea and to try and get him some support. Ultimately, she called 911 for an ambulance because that's what people were advising her to do. The NYPD showed up in tactical gear. Often, the NYPD's protocol when there's somebody who's in emotional distress is to send the emergency services unit, which is the NYPD's name basically for a SWAT team. So they had, bulletproof vests. They had all sorts of equipment. They had, big guns. They ultimately busted in, shot and killed Mohammed. The last shot was fired at close range to his head while he was on the ground, so execution style. I think it's important to say that before Mrs. Ba called 911, she was actually calling around trying to find services for her son, and she couldn't find any. So 911 was the last resort. So then if you just flip it and think about what would have happened, first of all, if Mrs. Ba and her son had access to resources that they need, if there was language access so that she was able to also communicate with the services, because at the time, she had just come from Guinea. It might not have even gotten to that crisis point. We might not have even needed a crisis response. But then let's say it still got there. Imagine what would have happened if the people who showed up were not cops that basically looked like they were going to war, but instead peer crisis response counselors, people who have already been through mental health crisis themselves, know what the experience is, and are trained to treat somebody who's dealing with crisis with dignity, respect their humanity, and to work with them to figure out what it is that they need. That's the kind of system that we're fighting to set up, and ultimately we need to completely remove the NYPD from being involved in this kind of situation, or we're only going to see more deaths.
Yeah. Samy, let me bring you in and talk a little bit about this here, because having those people out there that are not NYPD, they're credible messengers, and they have the opportunity really to mitigate a situation, but unfortunately, they're not given the full privilege because the NYPD still has intervention, and we know and we've seen cases where mental illness has taken a fatal turn simply because people were unable to de-escalate or to be able to discern what to do.
Yeah, and that's sad that continues to happen within our community when we have already voiced our opinions and our concerns on regards to how this situation has already been handled, and that they have options that we've already provided to mediate these problems that are already existent. So the main issue that we have is that our mayor and the city of New York keeps removing the resources that are well needed for our communities from the areas that are most needed. And the only budget that we see that remains the same and continues to be inflated is the police budget. And that, in my eyes, is the biggest problem that we continue to face.
Yeah, and Yul-San, I know you have a budget justice campaign out there that you're working on dealing with this issue, because you don't want to see, as they talk about, funding for police, the astronomical numbers that go towards police, is what some critics would like to say. Hey, it's an astronomical number. We don't want to see that money going there. We'd like to see it going otherwhere, being redirected. I know where you stand, but go ahead and let the viewers know where you stand.
Sure. Well, I think you just got to think about where are the safest communities. The safest communities are not the communities with the most police. The safest communities are the ones with the most resources. There is plenty of research and data out there that shows that community well-being and community safety is determined by access to housing, by access to healthcare, by community-based mental health care services, by access to jobs, by access to education, right? There's plenty of research that shows that over-policing and mass incarceration actually increases inequality, it increases poverty, and those are the social determinants of safety concerns, right, of so-called crime and violence. And so, what we see with this mayor's archaic and unjust approach to public safety, to just throw more and more money into the NYPD, throw more and more cops at what are really public health problems, is a race to the bottom in terms of public safety. What we want to see is invest the money in community services and community infrastructure, invest the money in the kinds of anti-violence programs that actually decrease reliance on law enforcement and locking people up, and increase resources to community, increase community building, and increase just let's make a 180 shift in how we approach public safety.
Samy, we know that when we see, George Floyd and we saw Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, we saw that all during COVID. But as we look, and we found the respondents to this, it was predominantly young people taking to the streets and making their voices heard. Talk to me about youth activism. You're engaged, but at the same time, you're also engaging. And talk to us about why it's important for young people to be a part of this movement, at the same time having and using their voice.
Yeah, I find it to be extremely important, not only for the youth, but all demographics to feel like they have a voice and they have something they can add to the movement. All sides of experience and all knowledge is always welcome when it comes to the movement, because every attribution is going to be a help to what we want to achieve. And no matter your age demographic, but everyone has a goal and a vision on what they feel that their community not only needs, but how it should be thriving. And it's on all of us to continue that fight and ensure that we hold still and we hold together when it comes to proactively fighting, not only for the needs that we need within our own communities, but what we need for a city as well.
So Yul-San, how can people take part and join the movement, if you will?
Well, first of all, I will just shout out, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary on May 16th. We'll be at Brick. And so we hope that folks will join us there, get to know the Justice Committee more. You can find out more on our website or at bit.ly.jsm40. But also just let us know. I mean, we are, the Justice Committee's membership is open to New Yorkers of color who care about these issues, are aligned with our mission. Email us at info@justicecommittee.org, go to our website, justicecommittee.org, find us on social media. If we're not the right organization for you, plug into another one. We'll help you find another one. But get in touch and get involved. And as Samy said, there's a role for everyone to play.
And if there's a family out there and they've been affected by police violence, they really just don't know how to navigate, because that is a lonely place to be in, where people just don't know where to go. What should they do?
Sam, you want to take that?
Yeah, they should feel free to reach out to us at Justice Committee, or even reach out to people within their own community that are proactively looking to help. And every which community that I visited, there's always been somebody proactively looking to fight for a good cause. And we all have intersections in which we meet. So if it's not directly coming through Justice Committee, we will eventually touch paths. I offer myself as well as a resource. Definitely reach out to me if you want more personalized experienced, of course, somebody that has gone through something similar as you. Definitely feel free to reach out to me at Brian189 at Instagram, or at justicecommittee.org. They'll definitely navigate to directly speak with me, and I definitely hope that I can be an asset to your cause.
Yeah, Yul-San, you get the final word. What do you want people to know?
It's going to take us all. There's a lot of work to do. We are, our communities are really struggling under a mayor who has, as I said before, an archaic and abusive approach to public safety. But our communities are strong and resilient. We just got the How Many Stops Act victory. We're gonna fight to get Lieutenant Jonathan Rivera fired for killing Alan Feliz. And it takes a village to raise a movement and a vision for real community safety.
Yeah, well, thank you both for sharing, Samy. Yul-San, appreciate having you. I certainly love to have you back on the show. Keep up the great work, and hopefully we'll get a chance to connect soon.
Thank you. Take care.
All righty. Taking a quick break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Thank you, BronxNet. Congratulations on 30 years. What an amazing accomplishment. On behalf of myself, Alina Dow, and I represent the Dow Twins and the Dow Twins Show, who are young producers. They started, I think, when they were 11, and now they're 14. They started making 30-second little fun facts, and now they are doing 30-minute shows. And it goes to a testament of how much you guys do in the Bronx to make young people want to continue to be involved. I wish you 30 more amazing years and beyond. Thank you for what you do.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
And welcome back. With over 2 decades of relentless dedication to this cause, our guest, a champion for equal justice, currently serving as the president and CEO of the National Legal Aid and Defender Association, our guest has been at the forefront of shaping policies and initiatives promoting fairness and equity in legal representation. Joining me now and sharing more is, yes, the president and CEO of the National Legal Aid Defenders Association, April Frazier Camara. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And so as we talk about the association here, I want to talk a little bit about the work that you do, and I've shared a little bit about it, but take us a little bit further behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So National Legal Aid and Defender Association, we're over 100 years old, actually 112 years old. The organization was started based on one premise, that all people, when you face civil or criminal court, should have the right to an attorney regardless of your ability to pay. So we've been working for over a century on the issue of access to justice for people who cannot afford representation. So typically those communities, under-resourced communities, are brown and black communities. And so at the heart of what we do, we also focus in on racial equity, because we understand without racial justice, there can be no true equal justice.
And when we talk about true equal justice, give us the state of where you see things right now. I mean, you know, I know the last guy that was up at the highest office in the United States really has done some things in terms of really polarization, and that's carried out in a lot of places. But from your lens, what are you saying?
Yes, so for us here at National Legal Aid and Defender Association, on next week, we're going to be celebrating the 61st anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright, which is the Supreme Court decision that guaranteed the right to counsel in criminal cases. And 61 years later, we still see that there is so much work to be done around funding public defense and making sure that not only do people have access to an attorney, but they have access to a good, trained, competent, and well-resourced attorney when they're facing the loss of their liberty in a criminal case. And for those people who are in civil court, we unfortunately we still don't have a right to counsel for every person who are dealing with civil issues. And so what we see is that in many cases 80% of people go unrepresented in civil proceedings in this country. And we know what that means for people who don't have resources or may not be educated to understand the system. It means that a lot of people lose housing, lose public benefits, and lose other vital services that they need to take care of themselves and their families. So many, many years later, we find that we have a lot of work to do to realize the true promise of equal justice in America.
You know, since COVID has taken place, a lot of people talk about the backlog in the court system. What are you finding by way of the court system? Are you able to necessarily navigate with fluidity, or are we finding still there's a backlog and it's kind of like creating some issues for you on the ground?
That's a really great question. So we have our members, our civil legal aid attorneys and public defenders who are in courtrooms across the country every single day. And what we hear from our members is that the courts are still facing issues around backlogs. And actually one issue that really relates to that is retention of civil legal aid and public defenders. Many of our organizations post-COVID are facing grave challenges on being able to recruit and retain attorneys to do this work. And one of the reasons why there's such a challenge is because the pay for civil legal aid and public defenders in many places are so low that people cannot afford to do the work. And so, unfortunately, the issue that we see with the courts and the backlog is directly related to the fact that we have underfunded civil legal aid and public defender offices, and they cannot compete in this job market. Post-COVID, people are demanding more resources and more benefits, and many civil legal aid and public defenders cannot compete in this job market. But what that means for people who are in court, if you are being held in custody, you're at Rikers, or here if you're at DC jail, what that means is that how long you have to wait for your trial date is extended. If you're in civil court, what it means is that a proceeding related to the custody of your children or child support is delayed. So we understand that it has real world impacts on the communities that we serve.
I know that you've also advocated for an increase in federal funds. Talk to us about that advocacy.
Absolutely. So a major part of what we do is advocate on the federal level for increased funding for civil legal aid and public defense. So we are about to kick off our campaign this year for 2024 and 2025 federal budgets. So many people don't know, but for civil legal aid, most of civil legal aid services is funded through a program called the Legal Services Corporation, which is an entity here in Washington, D.C. that administers funds to civil legal aid programs. And every year we have to fight not only to keep those funds, but really fight to have an increase to address the years of disparities in the lack of funding that we've seen. In the previous administration, there was a threat by the last White House to completely eliminate Legal Services Corporation funding. And we fought. And not only did we win the fight, but we actually received increased funding during that year. And so what we're fighting for this year is to actually see additional increases, because we understand that because legal services is so chronically underfunded, that there's a great need for us to increase funding for civil legal aid. And equally for public defense, we're fighting for the Equal Defense Act, which is a federal piece of legislation to provide support and resources to public defender offices. And that is a fight that we're committed to, and we're doing every single day here in Washington, D.C.
April, when people talk about public defenders, there's this automatic stereotype and connotation sometimes it comes. But the reality is they are so essential in the court system. And I think you pointed out just a few minutes ago of how important it is in a courtroom to have legal representation and what that can mean in terms of, anything from jail time to civil, the whole 9 yards. But can you please walk through some of our viewers the importance of the work that you do?
Absolutely. So specifically, I'm a former public defender. And I understand some of the community's response to public defense because, as you may hear in my voice, I'm a Southern girl and I grew up in Tennessee. And I understand that many systems have been woefully underfunded. And the services that communities have received from those systems have been not up to par. So we understand that. And I think it's important for public defenders to reckon with that past. But I also had the fortunate opportunity to attend Howard University and here in Washington, D.C., and actually be exposed to the D.C. Public Defender Service. And that's where I became a public defender. So I saw firsthand what a well-resourced, well-funded, and excellent public defender system looks like. And so for those who have had the opportunity to practice in those settings, I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, if a loved one of mine was accused of a crime here in DC, I would want them to be represented by the public defender. And that's what we want people to be able to say, regardless of what zip code you're in. And so the role that public defenders play is not only vital to the individual cases that they're representing, but all of our constitutional rights, the rights not to be harassed by police, the rights for the right to remain silent, the right for the government to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you've committed a crime before your liberty is taken. And those are fundamental rights that are important to all of us. Even if you've never stepped into a courtroom, you want to make sure you have a system that's upholding those values. And that's what public defenders do every single day.
Thank you, April. I wanted to get that point out there because I'm sure people are asking the question, and there's some stereotypes that are associated with it. I really love the fact of how you talked about that, we heard your accent out there. I kind of thought you was like Brooklyn or the Bronx, the way you sounded, but, I understand. It's D.C. Got you. Thank you for sharing that with us. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about, racial equity here, because obviously that's what we need out here. We need equity. It's not just equality, but it's really equity. How do we get to that place of, getting people trained in the area of that? Because that's a lot of work that can really mitigate some of the things that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. So I think it's very important anytime we're talking about public defenders, civil legal aid attorneys, people who serve communities of color, for you to be properly trained on what the history and what the realities are for people who live in those communities. So at NLADA, when I first became president over 2 years ago, we launched the Racial Equity Institute, which is focused on training public defenders and civil legal aid attorneys on racial equity issues. And that work is so critically important because a part of being competent and having competent representation is understanding the people who you are standing beside in courtrooms every single day. You have to understand the conditions and the realities that they live in as people of color in America. And we also know that racism is so deeply embedded into our legal system that if you have attorneys who do not understand that history and that relationship, you can actually end up doing more harm than good when representing people of color. So the issue of understanding race and racial equity, it is a core competency to providing quality representation, specifically for under-resourced communities. So we think that it is a fundamental part of what it means to be a public defender and civil legal aid attorney.
And for people who want to find out more information about your organization and the work that you're doing, please, how do they go about doing that?
Sure, you can visit our website at www.nlada.org and learn about our work. And also, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we would invite you to follow us. And we want you to learn about the work. And also, go visit your local public defender office and civil legal aid office and really understand the important work that they do.
And when you say the important work that they do, I think it can't be left out there that there's some transformational work that goes on by public defenders. And, some people pay for attorneys and some people cannot afford to pay for attorneys. But just because you cannot afford to pay for an attorney does not mean that the attorney cannot do the best job for you either, right? And so when we see what's happening in our courtrooms and we see the lack of representation, how does it make you feel?
I get up every single day troubled by the fact that we do live in a country where justice oftentimes is based on how much money is in your bank account, how much justice can you afford, and that should not be true in an equitable, fair, and just legal system. And so I think it's a fight that while we have made advancements, we still have a whole lot of work to do. Specifically around, it's not just about representation. We know that a person can stand next to you, but whether or not you have a true advocate, someone who is going to fully represent you, zealously represent you, get to know who you are as a person, and understand that you're more than a case number. You're an actual person with a family and loved ones. That type of representation is what we're fighting for every day, not just the bare bones representation that we see afforded in many systems. So that component is really important, not just whether you have access to an attorney, but whether you have quality representation. And that's the important part that we're fighting for. But also let me note that a few years ago, about 5 years ago, we started the Black Public Defenders Association. And we also understand that it's important that for the clients that we serve to see people who look like them providing representation. And so that is also a very key part of what we're doing here, trying to increase diversity in the legal profession, because too often people from our community are not afforded the opportunity to become attorneys, to take on these roles, to fight for our community. And we want to see that change as well. I think it's important for people from our community to be standing side by side to clients who look like them. And that is an important part of quality representation as well in advancing equal justice.
Well, April Frazier, Camara, thank you so much for being with us, sharing a lot about that. President and CEO of the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. Appreciate having you, and please come back to see us again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, tell you, we want to let you know you come to the end of the show today. Hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice Forum. Now, if you want to rewatch this week's episode, recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation, present your point of view, visit us on our social media at BronxNet TV. And join us next week. We continue to elevate the discussion, bring further awareness on the issues that matter across the globe and right here locally. I'm your host,